Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Real Faith in the Real World, a ministry of Normal First United Methodist Church in Normal, Illinois. Let's listen to hear what Pastor Kathy King Nobles has to say today.
So 70 years ago, when the congregation walked over to this new church building, 211 North School Street, this was one of the verses that they sang telling the story from Joshua. From the hymn that we sang that Nathan led us in, verse 13, yes, there's 13 verses. Actually, what I found was that there's 26 verses or 25, But verse 13, let me say this, it follows Psalm 136, and Psalm 136 tells story after story of God's faithfulness. Verse 13 tells this story: floods stood still like walls of glass, while the Hebrews' band did pass. For God's mercies shall endure, ever faithful, ever sure. So the rising waters and the floods just this past week reminded us again of the power of water and the dangers of high levels of water. And there are times when you can't pass through a body of water. It's just too impossible, too dangerous. So this was the case for the Israelites as they approached the Jordan River, or at least it appeared to be the case. Now, not understanding the science of it all, nor does that need to be our focus, we read that the Israelites successfully crossed over this impassable river and safely reached the other side. I imagine there were moments of jubilation and relief, perhaps some singing and dancing. Their journey could continue. But there was one more thing that they needed to do before they continued on. And it was important that they pause, that they thank God for their safe travels, and that they mark this place as a memorial so that they and others would remember how God had seen them through. Now, you may have had an experience like this in your own life. You find your way through a storm in life, whatever it looks like, and there's this sigh of relief. And then though you're ready to kind of move on and put that behind you, you recognize that, you know what, maybe I need to pause. Maybe I need to stop and give thanks that I made it through. So after safely crossing the Jordan River, God tells them, now take 12 stones from the very place where the priests were standing in the river and carry them and pile them up at the place where you're going to camp tonight. You see, these stones of remembrances would serve as a permanent national reminder and a memorial to future generations of God's faithfulness. You know, if you've ever been in the Holy Lands, one of the things that struck me when I visited there was there are stones everywhere. So it's no wonder that stones were an image that they used as a reminder of God's faithfulness. And this particular story is one of a handful of stories from the scriptures where a momentous event is marked by the placing of stones. Historians call these stones of remembrance. To everyone else, the stones just were a heap of rubble, but to the people of God, they were a constant reminder that Yahweh was a personal and powerful God working wonders on behalf of God's people. Now, there are other monuments like this around the world that we still see today. Some are called standing stones. You may have seen them in your travels. Standing stones are just what they sound like. They are stones that have been placed in an upright position as a marker or as a dedication to what happened there. So today, I think we continue that tradition to some degree. We have stones of remembrances, standing stones, in our cemeteries. Our cemeteries are filled with headstones, marking the final resting places for our loved ones. And etched on these headstones is their name, date of birth and death, sometimes brief family tree, sometimes a word or image that describes the person. But as we all know, headstones are way too small to capture the essence of someone's life. And I want to say this is true for obituaries as well. There was a recent interview on NPR they interviewed the New York Times obituary writer. Yes, that is a position at the New York Times. Sam Roberts offered his unique perspective from his 40-plus years of writing obituaries for the New York Times. So as you can imagine, this type of work gets lots of strange looks and creates awkward conversations when people ask him what he does for a profession. But I liked what he said. He said, "I don't write about death. I write about life." He says obituaries are not about death. Death figures into one sentence in the obituary. They are really mini biographies. They are stories of people's lives and what made them celebrated. He talked about in the interview the two most challenging things in his work. The first one is who gets an obituary in the New York Times. So he said approximately 150,000 people die every day here in the U.S. They have room for 3 or 4 obituaries. And so they have to kind of select who are they going to write the obituary about. But here's a few of the more unusual ones that he shared in his interview. He wrote an obituary for Hercule Poirot. So some of you know who that is. Hercule Poirot is a famous fictional detective created by writer Agatha Christie. He wrote an obituary for Gus, the neurotic polar bear who lived at the Central Park Zoo. And recently, the Times ran an obituary for a 49-year-old vacuum cleaner named Beth that had belonged to Senator Chuck Grassley. This is a true story. I Googled it. Somebody last night at church said, "Oh, I have a vacuum cleaner that's like 42 years old." So the first challenge is who gets an obituary. The second challenge is, he says, is how to put into context in the arc of someone's entire life when they did something really wrong, a major error that caused problems in other people's lives, when there was a misdeed that was so large. And he said that's a tough decision. But it's remembering that all of us are more than just one moment in time. What are the other stories of their lives that also need to be shared? He says everybody has a story to share, and it's really up to us to try to find out what that story is. And he went on to say, so if I can't find a story in someone's life, in their trajectory, I think it's more my failing rather than theirs. Everyone has a story to share, and it's our job to find that story. So stones of remembrances and obituaries give us the opportunity to honor the lives of those who've died. They are memorials. But if we let them, they also have this kind of transcendence, moving beyond history to inspire us still today. You know, I often remind families at funerals that their loved one now lives on in each of them, and that we carry on their legacy, the legacy that they've passed on to us, so that their lives will continue to inspire our lives. When we remember our loved one's faith, perhaps it will deepen our faith. And when we remember their capacity to forgive, for example, perhaps it will nudge us to do something that we never imagined we could do. And when we remember their courage, perhaps it will ignite our courage. You see, stones of remembrances are not just about the past. They're an invitation to listen and learn from their stories that transcend time, inspiring us still today with their dedication, determination, and faithfulness. Their stories are like the roots in our lives, steadying us for the work that we have to do today. So I think this building, 211 North School Street, could be considered a stone of remembrance, a standing stone that stands as a reminder of God's faithfulness and the congregations before us, their faithfulness some 70 years ago. This is a stone of remembrance that has been passed down to us. And it's a reminder in time of an earlier congregation that made a decision not just to benefit themselves, but to benefit all those who would come after them. And it's a reminder to us today, a nudge to us today, to lead with that same kind of courage and determination. I think the baby fold is another stone of remembrance that came from acts of courage and faithfulness. You've heard the story in the living room of Nancy Mason's home, a faithful member of Normal First of this congregation. A vision was inspired and given life when a group of Methodists said, "We need to do something about the orphan children coming by train through Bloomington Normal." Now, they didn't have a grand vision of creating a school or later a residential facility or adoption services or foster care services. They simply were responding to God's vision and the need that was right before their eyes. And they created a stone of remembrance that is a living, breathing, life-giving ministry still to this day. So when you drive by the Baby Fold, one of its many sites, or you hear the clanging of the noisy offering each month, or you hear a story of a child's life that has changed, those are all stones of remembrances. You see, stones of remembrances aren't just physical objects. They're gifts that have been poured into us that fill us for the work and the ministry that God has called us to be about here and now, today, in this time and in this place. And so may we live with gratitude for all who've gone before us. And may we honor their lives through our faithfulness today.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Real Faith in the Real World. We hope that this message helps you grow in your understanding and sparks new insight on your journey of faith. If you found this episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share. And as always, if you have questions and want to dive deeper into today's topic, please feel free to reach out to us by going to normalfumc.org. Click About Normal First and click Contact to leave us a message. We would love to hear from you. And until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep growing.